Hey guys, Pat here. Welcome to my favorite film list. I'm covering my 20 favorite films of all time, movie by movie, each getting its own video. I've already covered 20 through 18. If you haven't seen those videos, they're on my channel and you can go back and see them and see which ones I picked. So now we're on number 17. So the films that I looked at beforehand all were very similar. They dealt with nostalgia. They were basically coming of age stories in a sense. They were very youthful movies, a lot of them made by youthful directors, or at least directors that had a youthful spirit. That was American Graffiti, Cinema Paradiso, and Almost Famous. So my list was looking a little cliche, like I only loved one type of movie. And you have to understand this. A favorite film list isn't you saying this is the best film of all time or one of the greatest works in cinema history. It's you saying that it's a film that you love subjectively, that you're passionate about it yourself. That's the difference between something that's a favorite and something that you admire. I think Fanny and Alexander's probably one of the 5 to 10 greatest films ever made. It's not one of my 30 favorite films, really, but I would never not acknowledge the brilliance of that film. But the next film we're going to talk about is widely acclaimed and loved and praised, and has been for years now, and also has really nothing in common with the previous films I spoke of, be it in genre or even in tone. And that is Ridley Scott's 1982 Blade Runner. Now, I've given Ridley Scott a lot of crap on this channel. A lot of people got upset with me on my Alien Covenant review because I was very critical of Ridley Scott in that video. I said that Ridley Scott is a very inconsistent director. He doesn't really know what he wants when he makes his films. His stories are all over the place. He couldn't pick a good script to save his life. I think his commercial background never really left his bones, and I think he never made another truly great film, like a masterpiece, after Blade Runner. Now, I do like Thelma and Louise, and I do think Gladiator and Black Hawk Down are enjoyable enough movies. I'm just not the world's biggest fan of them, but people think I hate them. I don't hate those movies. I'm just not in love with Gladiator or Black Hawk Down like other people are. I don't think they're bad movies per se. They're just not for me. What can I do? I just don't enjoy Gladiator. I feel the same way about Braveheart, and a lot of people love Braveheart. I just can't. There's just certain movies that don't connect with you. It's weird. I can't explain it. I'm not going to give like Gladiator a negative review on this channel or something. But the one time for me that Ridley Scott did know what he was doing on some level, though I still think it's debatable, considering that he pretty much disagreed with Harrison Ford and the writers and the producers, and he still seems to be disagreeing with these people and so on. I'm not sure. See, the thing about Blade Runner is that it's an unfinished movie in a lot of ways. It never felt like it was a complete work. When I first saw the movie, I saw the narrated version, the original theatrical cut, that didn't perform well at the box office. A lot of people know this, the history of it, but this film had a very high budget and ended up losing a lot of money for the studio. It got mixed reviews from critics. Everyone praised its visuals, but said that it was boring, basically, and it lacked character development, stuff like that. It was very hated at the time when it first was released, had a lot of bad press. Then it came out on video, people started to watch it all the time and realized it was brilliant. And then the director's cut came out years later where they cut the narration out, which Ridley never wanted in the original cut, and it was never even thought to be in the movie when they were making it. Harrison Ford didn't even want to do narration. That's why he did such a shitty recording. So that was the version I grew up on, was a VHS copy of that cut. I saw the director's cut years later as a teenager. Now, I'm not going to lie, when I first watched Blade Runner as a kid, I thought it was pretty boring. I was a kid, I liked watching Star Wars. I thought Return of the Jedi was amazing then. And the thing about Blade Runner is it's slow. It's extremely slow. Like, it's about Deckard putting the pieces together. There's a 5-minute sequence where Deckard's looking at like a photo. It may not be 5 minutes, but it feels like 5 minutes, where you just keep closing in on this photo. Scott takes his time. It's a pretty deliberately paced film, and there are a lot of stretches of it with not a lot of dialogue, right? Now, to me, all those things about the film are amazing. I think they're up there with the works of Jodorowsky or Stanley Kubrick or Fritz Lang. I think it's incredible what Ridley Scott accomplished here. So the weird thing is, if I don't like Ridley Scott so much, right? If, well, not don't like, but if I'm so critical, if I think that he doesn't know what he's doing when he makes most of his films, like Legend or 1492, G.I. Jane, Exodus, a lot of his films, not all of them, obviously. The Martian's a pretty well put together movie, although that was based off a book. But I think a lot of his films, they're messes conceptually. They change the idea so much during production, and then when he goes into filming, he doesn't really stick to the simple idea he had. The thing with Blade Runner that makes it Ridley Scott's best film, although that's debatable, you could say Alien's his best film, and I would have no problem with anyone saying that. It makes sense to me. Is the collaborative process he had on these two movies. That's the difference. See, Geiger's work on Alien was a lot of what worked about that movie, the set design and the subtext he had, with Scott's brilliant visual work. Scott did a lot of the storyboarding. He came up with the look of the ships and all that stuff. So not knocking anything from Scott. He's a terrific set guy. Kind of like, people hate that I compare him to Tim Burton, but I don't think that's insulting. Tim Burton makes a lot of gorgeous films. Sleepy Hollow was shot by Emmanuel Lubezki and has a beautiful cinematography. It was nominated for an Oscar. A lot of his films are gorgeous, have terrific sets, but they don't always have the best stories and characterization. The narratives don't always work. I'm not saying Tim Burton's like at the height of Ridley Scott, though I think Ed Wood's a great movie. I'm just saying they have a similar kind of pattern with consistency. You never know when you go to see a Ridley Scott film if it's going to be a really good movie or it's going to be a messy piece of shit like Robin Hood. You're just kind of sitting there going, how the fuck did this happen and why does this film cost $200 million? The thing with Blade Runner, though, is it had the collaboration that Alien had, right? Alien had great screenwriters. I think Dan O'Bannon, he worked on the script. It was terrific. The cast was amazing. The fact that he got those actors like John Hurt or Sigourney Weaver, Tom Skerritt. So that's basically what happened with Blade Runner. Because Ridley's not much of an actor's director, and the actors say this. Even Harrison Ford talked about this. He didn't get a lot of direction, and that's not a criticism. A lot of directors do this. Stanley Kubrick would kind of try to manipulate his actors to act the way he wanted to, or Clint Eastwood's a very hands-off director and only does a couple takes. So I'm not saying that style's wrong. What Ridley Scott likes to do is focus on making the shot perfect. He's a technical guy, and this was a very tough movie to make. So it's all about getting the set right, the lighting, the costumes, the just every single thing has to be right. And Harrison kind of wandered around in this movie. I mean, he's talked about this. Harrison Ford kind of didn't really know who his character was and what he was doing. I think that adds to the movie, and it's one of Harrison's better performances because of that, because Deckard seems confused. Although Sean Young's performance, I think, needs work, and the romance between her and Deckard is something I don't like in the movie. I hate to say that because I love Blade Runner, but if I have one criticism before I really get into this review is that the relationship between them just doesn't really sell for me. And I've never felt Ridley Scott was very good at romance. Romance just doesn't seem to be one of his strengths as a storyteller. He's great at all sorts of things, but I'm not sure. He just never seemed to be able to capture romance well on camera. But, that's what it is. Anyway, Hampton Fancher wrote the original screenplay. And then he had to do a rewrite of it. And I think David Peebles came in and did another rewrite, and he's the guy that worked on Unforgiven. And Hampton Fancher's original screenplay was wonderful. And he wanted to leave it open that if Deckard was a replicant or not, or human, because it doesn't matter. That was the ultimate thing with this movie, is that I prefer his idea of it to Ridley, where Ridley thinks, okay, Deckard is a replicant, or Harrison Ford, who thinks that he's a human, and, we need a human to relate to. What Fancher's idea was, which I think is brilliant, how I always interpreted Blade Runner, is that it doesn't matter if Deckard is a human or replicant, because there's no difference. There's no difference if Roy and him are replicants or humans. They're the same thing, because Roy is alive at the end when he dies, and Deckard knows that. So to me, Fancher was the only one who really got the brilliance of Blade Runner. It was the mystery. See, that's what I'm saying about Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott never really knows the best way to go with these things, right? He's not always the best guy to make his movies have that depth. He wanted it to be definitive and leave all these clues for you with the unicorn dream that he added in the director's cut. And the final cut, which is the cut that I'm reviewing here, the final cut's the one I recommend because it fixes a lot of the audio issues. The transfer's beautiful. it makes a movie that was always great, that had some rough edges, and really streamlines it. Terrific. But when I say it's unfinished, it's because there was a lot of compromises here. Ridley was always fighting with the studio. Releasing that original version fucked a lot of this movie up over the years, right? And even now, it feels like Ridley never quite made the exact film he had in his head. But most filmmakers don't. But the thing about the screenplay here is that the screenplay is filled with a lot of the nuance and subtlety and humanity, and a lot of that was in Philip K. Dick's book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? They're very different stories, but a lot of that depth and humanity and brilliance that was there is in that original novel. So Scott seems to be at his best when he has a dense amount of material to work with. When he has a book, when he has a screenwriter that gives him a lot to do, a lot to work with, basically, and when he has a terrific cast. You gotta understand who's in this. Rutger Hauer. And Rutger Hauer improvises the best monologue in the movie. The Tears in the Rain speech that's at the end of the movie, Rutger Hauer improvised that. So that wasn't even in the script, and Ridley Scott didn't come up with that. And that's the line everyone quotes the most. That's the one everyone goes to, because Rutger Hauer was such a brilliant actor and was so well cast as Roy that he could bring that to the role. It's like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. He was a great actor, and he had a background hanging out with guys like that. So he just improvised the whole clown speech that's famous from the movie. And a lot of people go up to the screenwriter, or Martin Scorsese, and said, "Man, you guys wrote that." And he goes, "I didn't write that shit." Or R. Lee Ermey in Full Metal Jacket. Stanley Kubrick didn't write any of that stuff. R. Lee Ermey came in and was just saying stuff, and it was great. No writer could write dialogue that brilliant. That's how Blade Runner is. Films that are brilliant, that stand the test of time, are usually a series of happy accidents. It's not because one person made it great or bad. If Ridley Scott could just make a movie a masterpiece every time he made a film, then all of his films would be masterpieces. But that's not how film works. Film is a collaborative process. You have a cinematographer, you have an editor, you have actors, you have writers. These two films that he made, and The Duelist, which is a great movie, but these two breakout films of his, he never had that same level of collaboration. Even the cinematography on Blade Runner, I think, is just nothing Ridley ever came close to again, because the cinematographer he worked with, which I think is, it's either Jeff Cronenweth, I think his name's Cronenweth. He was working on Alien 3, and I think he died on the set of that movie, and then his son started working for David Fincher. But his cinematography in that film is one of, in my mind, the first modern-looking films you'll see. When you watch Blade Runner, it looks like the evolution to modern film. I mean, it holds up insanely well. It might just be because the lighting was so good and how they went out of their way, but it doesn't... I mean, it doesn't look dated at all. It doesn't look like a film from the early 80s. It's astonishing. I mean, it's astonishing. So, what makes Blade Runner so good, though? Now that I'm giving you all this history of the production and my feelings on Ridley Scott, well, basically, it's a great... The three-dimensionality is you're wondering who they really are. They feel like real people. You sit there watching it, and you don't know if Deckard's really a good guy or a bad guy. You don't know if Tyrell's really a good guy or bad guy, and you don't really know if Roy's a good guy or a bad guy. That changes a lot throughout the movie, but then it changes on you again. And that's the closest any science fiction film that I've seen, except for maybe a handful, like for Fantastic Planet, that really capture that grayness of humanity. Are human beings ultimately good or bad? Which is something I think Kubrick was always trying to address in his films. Are human beings good or are they bad? Inherently, are we a good thing or a bad thing? And that's a good question. And Ridley Scott, like Kubrick, is giving you a very objective view on these things. He's showing you these people and letting these things play out. You know, you watch the sequences in Blade Runner where they're doing the test and they're talking, and it makes you wonder, you know, who's really doing the right thing here? What is the right thing here? You know, is this the end of humanity? Should human beings just fall to the wayside and be taken over by the replicants? Should human beings live in this controlled environment? Did we destroy the Earth? It doesn't look very good in the Blade Runner universe. It looks like we fucking destroyed it with pollution or something. But it's the noir elements because you feel like you're watching a classic detective story. And it traps you in that genre way where you're just like, okay, I want to know the mystery. I want to see the Blade Runner capture the replicants. They set that all up very early on, and then they have a big final, payoff at the end. The two people, Roy and Deckard are having their big final fight, right? But that's just on the surface level. Blade Runner has so much more going on. A lot of that has to do with Douglas Trumball's special effects work on it, which I think is insane. And the fact that they pulled off some of these shots. See, the way that Ridley Scott, because he's such a great technician, he took these miniatures that these guys worked on and he shot them so well that the scope of them feels huge, like the Tyrell Corporation. He just, the way he shoots it with the camera and framing and all that, you watch it today, it looks like a giant building still. It does not look fake at all. That's what makes Alien and this film stand up. They're not dated, they're timeless. They're timeless movies. They don't look like a film that's from way back in the day, and they don't even look like a new film. They have this thing where you could have watched it in the 40s and it would have worked for you, and you could watch it today. Now, don't get me wrong, people in the 40s I think would have freaked the fuck out at Alien or Blade Runner, but I'm just saying that they have a quality about them that's universal through the language of cinema. Every shot, every moment, every beat is Ridley Scott at his finest, because the people that he's working with gave him so much good stuff, and he's working with such talented people that his craftsmanship only services all this material, and all these things start adding up and adding up until you have a film that's dense with artistry and richness to go back to and explore. There's just lines of dialogue in Blade Runner I think about like poetry. There's the look on someone's eye. There's the idea of the animals not being real. Another element's the score by Vangelis, which is probably the top scores of the 80s. It's right there with any work of John Williams or Morricone. The Vangelis score is a masterwork. It's as good as the film itself. So the fact that it's on the film is just kind of nuts. I'd only could compare it to like the Akira soundtrack, where the soundtrack's just as good as the movie. Every single time that music comes on, it just hits you. It's insanely human and emotional, despite its like electronic synthy sound. It's very human, and it's a perfect way to reinforce what the movie's trying to say. See, what I always liked about Blade Runner, and when I was a kid, like I said, I thought it was boring. When I watched the director's cut on DVD when I was a teenager, I watched it one night, and then the next day I got up and I watched it again. And then I watched it again the next day. And then when I got the box set final cut with all the stuff and the 5 different versions, the work print, and all, although you don't need all those versions, and the cool little car and the unicorn, I watched that 2 times in a row because I always wanted to see everything fixed and see a better transfer. I watch Blade Runner every year. I have a poster of it in my room. It's become cliche at this point to be like a film buff and like Blade Runner. And a lot of people say it's their favorite sci-fi film. And I actually have some friends who don't like the movie. And it's an interesting conversation we have. And I hear their points. Their debate basically is, or their argument, I guess, is that Ridley Scott never really knew what the film was. It's a mess of ideas. It's a mess of concepts. It really has no main theme or idea. The Deckard thing doesn't make any sense because it's convoluted. Basically, you could tell that the writer, Harrison Ford, and Ridley Scott all disagreed, and because Ridley Scott changes the film so many times, he keeps changing how you can interpret it. And my friends who don't like the film, and one of them is someone who teaches film at a university. He's not a fan of Ridley Scott, and he says Blade Runner is one of the most overrated films ever, which I don't agree with. But his main criticism is that it's just beautiful images, and it's that 2001 thing where, yeah, there's depth and there's artistry and all that, and people like to whack off to it in film school, and they want to make it, but they just like to skim over the flaws of the movie. And I think Blade Runner's flawed. I've never said it isn't. I think it's really flawed. I think there's little things that don't work, right? Like the romance. And there's pacing issues. The movie's slow. It's got a slow second act. It doesn't bother me now that I've seen it so many times, but I can totally get why people in 1982 were freaked out. They probably thought they were going to go see a fast action film like Star Wars, and they weren't expecting this, character-driven film. But the thing with Blade Runner is that it ages with me. It sticks with me. right? The more time I spend with it, the more time I feel like I know Deckard more or I know Roy more. And I switch around. It's almost why the sequel coming out hurts so much of it, because it's not that I don't want a sequel. Like if Blade Runner 2049 was just starring Ryan Gosling and took place in the Blade Runner universe, that would be great. My problem is that Deckard is in the movie. So they're going to explain what the ending of Blade Runner means, and they're going to explain a lot of the mystery from Blade Runner. And that kind of ruins Blade Runner. I mean, the movie still exists and you don't have to watch the sequel, but what makes the last shot so great in the director's cut and final cut, which is the version you should watch. I don't like the driving off in the car happy ending with the shining shots. Is when Decker grabs that unicorn thing, and every who really does, right? About life and living, because we all die, and that's ultimately what the movie about. Everyone dies. It doesn't matter if you live 4 years or if you live 70 years or 90 years. You're gonna die one day, right? So is there really a difference? That's what's so great about Blade Runner. Is there a difference between you or the replicant? If we could make something so evolved that it had all of the qualities of a human being and we gave it memories, would that make it not a human being? Also, memories are stories you tell yourself. So are our memories just something that we've been told and reinforced, like the replicant's memories? Are memories even a real thing? Are you the person that you think you are? Do you even know who you are? Can you remember who you are? What is memory? What is time? That's so in this movie's fabric and every fabric of it. That's beautiful. But those things that I'm really breaking down is that Blade Runner is better than most films because most films don't have they don't most films are vacuous. Most films, when you watch them, have a lot of ideas, or they had a story idea and the actors try to elevate and all that stuff. They don't always do something that the magic of cinema does, which is what the great filmmakers do, right? And it happens rarely. And when the truly great films get made, like a Chinatown or something, or Rosemary's Baby, it's because the idea was so kind of weird and idiosyncratic and unique and esoteric. And then the filmmaker found a commercial way to present it. They took something really abstract and tough to transfer, let's say, on paper, right? Like a Philip K. Dick novel. But then Ridley Scott, through his abilities as a visual storyteller, is able to make a mainstream big budget movie out of this while keeping the weirdness that we come to know from sci-fi literature. Not a lot of films can pull this off. Few films ever really feel like literature. Few films really feel like they give you the feeling you get when you're done reading a long book, or when you watch you watch a whole season of a TV show and you feel like you got to know all these characters and there were so many themes and things going on. Blade Runner does all of this in under 2 hours. It does all of this in under 2 hours. Like Solaris is a 3-hour film, and I love Solaris. It's a great movie, but this film does everything Solaris does in 2 hours. It does it in an hour less. And that's because Scott keeps it focused as as that detective story. Deckard is chasing them down with guns. He's shooting them. But while that's all happening, you're slowly getting pulled into this drama, to this story, to this characterization, to this emotional substance, to this exploration of humanity. And it's why people write papers on Blade Runner. It's why you're taught Blade Runner. It's not just because of the visuals. That's one aspect, right? Making a good-looking movie. It's about making art. It's about painting. It's about poetry. It's about music. It's about sound. It's about pure art, because what Ridley Scott accomplished here is basically what he accomplished with that 1984 homage Apple commercial. That's just a commercial of, that really is just, it really is a commercial. It makes no sense. But when you're watching it, it has an impact. He does that here. It leaves an impact. It stings. Blade Runner stings. It's like a parasite, and it starts to take over. And the thing about movies like that are they could be good or bad, and you can hate them or love them, but you can't deny the power of them. You can't deny what they are, because they're made so confidently, and they're done with such assurance by the filmmakers. And the people that he got together were just so good and at his level that it all just overwhelms you. You know, who knew Kubrick getting Malcolm McDowell, that Malcolm McDowell would be his acting equal to what Kubrick wanted to do with Clockwork Orange, or Peter Sellers, right? That's the attitude here. So what I'm saying is, if film is a series of happy accidents, Blade Runner is one of the greatest happy accidents of all time. They had a tough time making this movie. They had a tough time writing this movie. They had a tough time even getting a version released that they were happy with. But now we have it, the final cut, and even though it's not entirely perfect, it's about as damn close as a movie can be. But it is that mystery of, is Deckard a replicant? Did he get, was he sent after other replicants to kill them? Is he a different model? He can get hurt. He can take a beating from them. And that's what's so interesting, right? You start to think. And then there's an idea at one point, I think they said there was going to be in the original script that Tyrell was going to be a replicant, and then you found out he was off somewhere else frozen. See, I think that's a wonderful idea. You know, is in the world we live in today, it's so scary because the more that we're becoming one with the internet, right? The singularity is already happening. We have the phone with us all the time, our computer. We're an extension of these technological things. There's this biomechanic element happening with human beings that we're not noticing. Blade Runner takes that idea to the full extreme, but then it just treats it like it's normal. You know, they live in a trashy city and everyone's just used to replicants and all that stuff. It's not a big deal to any of them, even though it's 2019, so it's kind of like, what? But that's what's so great about it. Like, it's just like, it's like anything else that goes on. You're like, oh, yeah, replicants. Yeah, they're up there in space and all that shit. But it's what made Alien so great is that the space jockey, when you saw it, it felt like this alien object that came out of nowhere, this biomechanical alien object, and then the xenomorph. And it made the vastness of space really come across, that they found this alien just in the middle of nowhere, basically, was the idea on this colony. And it made you really feel the sense of isolation and outer space and the vastness of it. It was beautiful. This movie does that in the same way. It gives you this hint of bigger things of what's going on up in outer space and what the government's doing and what's happening on Earth, but it doesn't explain it to you. These people are living this life. It just shows you. That's why the world building in Blade Runner is so good, and so many filmmakers have been influenced by it. This is why Akira was influenced by it, Ghost in the Shell, The Matrix. They don't want to over-explain the world. This movie teaches you that if you just jump into the world and let it get fleshed out through dialogue and characterization, that is more than spending all this time on exposition or going into detail how everything was made. You don't have to tell me how Tyrell makes the replicants. You don't have to tell me how all the science works or how the flying cars work and all that shit. You know, you just have to show me and make it physically work enough on camera that I can buy it as an audience member. So Blade Runner makes you buy this world. It immerses you in this world. You believe that you are in Los Angeles in 2019. You believe that you are right there with Deckard on this journey every step of the way. I think it probably has right up some of the best set design I've ever seen, so that just goes without saying. Some of the best lighting I've ever seen, that goes without saying too. But once again, those are aesthetics, and those are important. It's the heart of Blade Runner, because the thing that's so amazing is the film is aching with feeling and emotion and wanting you to connect with it, but it always comes with a restraint, which has always kind of been Ridley Scott's style. He's a very cold, restrained director, even the way he shoots his films with the lenses and stuff like that. It's a very cold approach to filmmaking. It's why I think Alien's so good, because, you know, these people feel like real people. The crew of the ship feel like real people. They don't seem like actors playing movie parts. And so when the stuff happens, it's almost like documentary-esque. It's almost like Texas Chainsaw. You're believing it as a real thing happening. It's what's so crazy about it. He does that again here. He does that again here masterfully, where you start to think these are real people. These are real situations. You keep forgetting that you're watching a film, that you're watching something that is manipulative and set up to frame things in one way or make you feel one way. And Ridley Scott's cold approach only benefits this film because it has all this humanity leaking out in the beautiful set design, the beautiful visuals, the beautiful acting, and all that stuff, little subtle moments, right? But Scott's coldness as a director somewhat makes it where it's like something you can't really touch. You look at it and you want to touch it, but you can't. And to me, that's kind of part of what being human is. You want to reach inside yourself and grab that part of yourself that'll let you know it's okay and who you are, but you ultimately can't. And the idea of who we are and why we are, basically what meaning of life is. If you just die and you go away and you never really existed but as a memory, which is the only way you can live on is through memories and other people talking about you and writing about you. Well, what is it to be human? Are you as important as the flesh as you are written down in text somewhere? As someone's memory, as someone telling you, like Roy telling Deckard as he's dying, about these wonderful things. I've seen things you people wouldn't believe, and then Deckard, that sticks with him. So the thing with the sequel is that just to me it hurts so much of that substance. But the reason Blade Runner remains one of my favorite films of all time, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself on themes and ideas here. I'm just trying to get it all out of the way. It remains one of my favorite films of all time because I'm a cynical guy naturally. I'm a very cynical guy. I'm cynical about movies. I'm cynical about art. I'm cynical about filmmakers' intentions. I'm cynical about giving meaning to films that aren't there, or trying to be pretentious and artsy when you discuss film. What I love about this is it doesn't make me ever feel that way when I talk about Blade Runner. It doesn't ever make me feel like I'm reaching or anything, because I think this is what they were all trying to do. I think they knew they were working on something special. And it comes across to me when I watch the movie. It comes across that they found this level of artistry with the way they shot a big budget modern day commercial film. So you got to understand, after 2001, even though Star Wars and Empire are great films, Raiders and all that, blockbusters became all about mass crowd pleasing entertainment. They were about set piece after set piece. If you go back and watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's basically a series of set pieces that are wonderfully connected together with great lines of dialogue and story, which is a lot of the modern day blockbuster. What Blade Runner did was it went back to old Hollywood. It went back to movies that you saw in the 30s or 40s with these great actors that were dialogue driven, people in small rooms talking, and the tension and all that came from that. It takes that and then uses the 80s, special effects and big sets and miniatures and paintings and all the stuff that came from the era of the blockbuster, and it treats it like an old classic Hollywood film. So when you're watching it, you think you're kind of watching an old classic, but in reality, you're watching a very innovative, groundbreaking film that influenced pretty much every director who saw it, like Christopher Nolan. And you see the influence today, even in Inception. You see Blade Runner all throughout it. And if it was just the aesthetics, it would be a shallow praise that people are influenced by. But it's not that. It's the idea of taking this conventional story of a guy hunting down these replicants to kill them and shoot them, and making it into something more than that. When he does shoot someone, it's not, oh, the good guy killed the bad guy. They when they die, it's not just, oh, I want them to die. It makes you feel awkward because you don't really want them to die. And that's what's so beautiful about Blade Runner. It's a violent story. It's a visceral story. It is a cynical story. It is, to me, about the end of humanity and the world falling to shit, and humans losing grasp on their own humanity. But it's about the ache, the quest for a human connection, for intimacy, that you can feel, that you can see, that's palpable and real. And David Lynch does this with a lot of his work, and that's why I'm a big David Lynch fan. He tries to take something really, really abstract and make it real for you to connect with emotionally, and he has to manipulate the tone or the camera, or change the pitch even of the actor's line delivery to get it to fit that. Ridley Scott has never been better than Blade Runner, because Blade Runner is every single quality that Ridley Scott has in his book, in his catalog, that makes him who he is as a talent. It's all of his talents presented to you with the utmost nuance, subtlety, beauty, and thought. There was the thought that's put behind the shots in Blade Runner, or the meaning in Blade Runner. It's not just the script, which is amazing. It's not just the actors. Ridley Scott, you could tell, was passionate about making this movie. And that passion, like with all great films, makes you passionate with your own life and your own art. And how can you not love that, right? So, number 17, which honestly, this could have easily cracked the top 10, is Blade Runner. And I am excited for the sequel by Denis Villeneuve. I hope it's good, but I don't like Deckard being in it. I think that really, really sucks. Um, some quick little points here at the end. I always talk about. I love Deckard's gun. I think his gun's one of the coolest designed weapons in movie history. I don't know why. Every time I see it, I want a prop of that fucking gun so bad. I think the poster is one of the greatest posters of all time. Like I said, I have it hanging in my room. The poster just is like a perfect, just quick way to understand what the movie is. Like immediately, I don't know how they pulled that poster off. It's truly astonishing. And it's the little details. Movies are a series of details. There's little details in Blade Runner, like the Asian setting, Deckard eating the noodles, the way that they talk to each other, the way that the lighting comes in and stuff like that. I don't know why. There's something that Blade Runner does that few other films really, that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of movies. They don't really quite pull it off the same way. I can't explain it. It's almost hard to articulate why this film's so brilliant. But the best thing I could say is that it's aching for a human connection that ultimately film can't totally give you. Film is a camera. It's sound effects. It's actors being put together to make you feel something, and Ridley Scott seems to understand that, particularly with this film. And I think he's obsessed with technology in a lot of ways. So what a great film for him to make, right? So the technology part of it is you're seeing the technology of film, and you almost want to be in the film. You want to lick the film, and it's not like Willy Wonka where you're just getting all this happiness and you just see the chocolate getting made at the beginning and you want to eat it. You don't necessarily want to live in the world of Blade Runner, but you want to understand these people who do live in it, and you go back to watch the movie because you want to see them again and think about them again. I never feel like Deckard's story is beginning or ending when I watch the movie. I always feel like I'm just jumping back into this continuous thing. And maybe the movie feeling somewhat unfinished is what's so brilliant, because life's a bit unfinished. You don't really know what happens when you die. Nobody does. And you really don't know if the things you thought that were important were or not, or anything like that. So I guess Blade Runner is, what is the value of humanity, and what is your value that you bring to it? And I guess if you can find any value, like Deckard does at the end, isn't that enough?